Hello, and welcome to the C-Suite Secrets. I'm Heather Parsons, your host, a serial entrepreneur, fractional CFO, and a business strategist. I've spent many years juggling business and a family life while helping entrepreneurs scale, optimize cash flow, and build real financial success. On our show, we'll bring you real conversations with founders, executives, and operators that actually move the needle in their business. No fluff, no filler, just smart strategy, systems that work, and insights that you can put to use right away. With that, let's dive right in. Today, we have James Hotson on the show. James, happy to have you here.
Thanks so much, Heather. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. So, for folks who haven't had a chance to meet you yet, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and how you become an entrepreneur and got to where you are today.
Originally, I'll be brief on it, but I grew up in Seattle and then quickly moved to Southern California because the sunshine's a lot nicer in Los Angeles area. And that's where I really started building companies. My first company was an e-commerce footwear business, manufactured the shoes in China, shipped them over. And that was great, but I thought software for these e-commerce direct-to-consumer companies would be a lot more interesting. So I was the first hire at a company called Retention Science, spent 10 years at that company, did everything on the sales side. We worked with over 500 brands. We ended up selling to the number one email marketing company called Constant Contact. And that was a great experience building a marketing AI technology company. And it was a really cool experience because when we started, it was big data, and then big data became machine learning, and then machine learning became AI. And so we got to see all the evolution of what real AI is. And after that, really wanted to hone my skills on providing value to that industry. And so realized that customer support was a huge opportunity where we could use AI to answer really tedious and repetitive questions really quickly. And so we built the platform on using Go to answer about 40% of tickets for e-commerce companies. So things like where's my order, um, where's my package, help me reset my password. That's all stuff that we could automate with AI. And this was early 2020 and 2021, before LLMs and OpenAI were really taking off. And at that time, we were able to do about 40% of customer tickets because everything was very rigid and very linear. And that company also got acquired by a help desk called Gladly. They're probably number 3 or 4 behind Zendesk and Gorgeous. And after that, started as a co-founder at Katara. And so what we've been doing is we've been building agentic workflows using things like OpenAI, helping companies build a reg vector database. And so now we're able to do low to high 80% of customer support issues, which is really pretty amazing to see how far it's come in such a short amount of time, where we can really just drop in a playbook and train an AI and have it rolling very quickly, which is pretty amazing.
That's incredible. So, a couple things I'd love to dive in there. Number one, for folks who aren't as familiar with AI, tell me a little bit, what's agentic AI mean? What does that look like?
I love it. I kind of think of it as, in a normal company, you might have your, typical workers, and then you have a manager above them who helps manage them. That's how I kind of think about these agentic AI workflows, where you have essentially a manager, which is the flow or the AI process, connecting multiple AI agents. And so in an agentic flow, you really need 3 things. You need an agent that manages or manipulates the data. In my opinion, that's the most important agent. And then you need an orchestration agent, one that kind of tells things what to do and where to go. And then you need your actually like intent agent, the one that's kind of understanding what's going on and making sure that it's delivering the right result. And so, example for that with that for Katara is we're ingesting the data, which might be what customers are asking about or what customers are talking about. We're comparing that to the existing database of, the documentation of the company, the playbooks of the company, and then we're able to draft out a response and put that into a channel. And that channel might be on the website or Slack or Discord or Telegram, any part where customers are interacting with the brand. So that's kind of how I think about these agentic flows. And then you can combine them as many different ways. We found that like each individual agent typically kind of caps out once you give it like 5 to 7 tasks. And so you need to combine multiple agents to build these agentic flows. And that's what we've become really good at, is templatizing those agentic workflows.
That's very interesting. So, whenever I think about clients, it sounds like this is used a lot for kind of desk type questions, but how do folks use AI like this more internally from an operations perspective? Do you all have a use case, or how have you done that in the past?
I think it actually can be even more powerful internally. I
Okay.
don't, every company I've ever worked at, information gets siloed. Certain teams are ahead of certain teams. Certain individuals on a specific team might be behind or want to get a quick update. And especially with the remote environment that we're more accustomed to now, it's way easier to miss out on that water cooler talk. And so we've introduced REG, which is a vector database of specific information. And you can set up these internal knowledge bases or an internal corpus based off of that company information. And so, example might be if you're a direct to consumer brand and you're tracking your production orders and you're tracking your inventory and you want to figure out where a certain order is, that's all managed typically in email and over Slack and WhatsApp. You can combine those channels, and then anyone who has access to those channels can have a chat GPT like interface or prompt it, say, hey, where are we at on this order? Did this step, what step needs to get taken next? And so I think this is really powerful for internal teams as well as external teams. And that's one reason we've been pushing kind of the boundaries on multi-reg, where you can set our agentic flows up to be internal facing or external facing, which I think is pretty fantastic for any business that wants to use it.
I would agree. One of the things that I find with clients that I work with is that internal knowledge base that you mentioned is so crucial to not only delivering to your clients, but satisfaction with employees within the business, all the things that go along with that. And I think the quicker we get folks to the information they need, the happier people are.
Yep.
They want to that not just instant gratification, but they want that usefulness right away.
They do. They want the usefulness. People are impatient. They know the technology is there. They know the information is there. I think we're all human. We're all kind of lazy at the end of the day, and we don't want to go digging for things. And so we just want to prompt something and get the answer that we need quickly. And I think that's what we're ultimately enabling what we can do. And it's just we've done really well with engineering teams as well, because we can monitor the code base on things like GitHub. We can start to, we don't have this built today, but track things like Linear or Atlassian, Jira, and track where tickets are and match that up with where staging is at, where production's at, and really have everybody up to date all the time. And I think that's will allow teams to move a lot faster. And at the end of the day, it's all speed. That's a revenue acceleration tool.
Absolutely. So I think that speed that you're talking about is what's really going to change not just technology and how we use technology, but how businesses operate long term. Whether you're in operations or finance or however you're, operating in the world, I think that quicker access to knowledge and being able to tap into the information you need is super crucial. How have you seen tools like yours really implement in the finance space? Have you all dabbled there at all yet?
Yeah, we can look at certain transactional data. Of course, you need to be compliant with all these things, and so that's actually a big piece is just monitoring compliance and rules and regulations and making sure you do that correctly. Um, but I think there's room to ingest data, start to, then you could prompt it. If it was a personal data set, you could say, hey, how much am I spending at the grocery store every month, and get a figure back, right? And you can start to feed and connect all these things in. We've done this in a handful of projects on Web3 when they're wanting to know, how much of a token there is or a certain number of transactions. It's a little bit easier because those are more public, but we're open to building, and that's I think where some of our consulting comes in, where we'll look at a business and we'll do like a 6 week shadow of a company, and we'll figure out where we can potentially implement. So in the finance space, it could be, how could we automate onboarding? How could we shorten the window from new customer to them actually getting the products that they need in their hands? So there's a lot of applications in there where anything that is highly repetitive and highly tedious is a great place for AI to be implemented and improve your process.
That's another really good point. Thinking about highly repetitive tasks, one of the things that I'd love your thoughts on is how this is going to impact transactional work, like just generic bookkeeping. How do you see AI kind of playing a role there in the future?
Well, I think you can start to plug in more of these data loader agents, right? If you are managing it on things like QuickBooks or you're managing on Zero, you can plug that agent in there. And then all of a sudden that gets all the financial data. And then you can plug that in with maybe your POs, your accounts receivable, and maybe your Stripe as well. So you could figure out the flow of money a lot quicker and figure out where you're going to be at the end of the month. It might help forecasting a ton. It might help inventory management a ton. I mean, I think it might help your tax planning a ton. Like, there's so much you can do by loading different data sets in. And I keep coming back to the data, but that's really the gold. And I think it's really easy for anyone to go build something like a chatbot. And it's actually fairly easy for you to go set up a vector database and do RAG. The nuance and the gold in there is the data enrichment, the tagging, the classification. And I think, kind of to answer your question on the financial side, if we could go in and we could auto tag every single one of your transactions throughout the year, that would help a CPA a ton to categorize things a ton, and we can do that instantly. So I just think the data is really the key component there, and so figuring out how do we apply that to get the most bang for the buck is just on a case by case basis.
I like that, and going back to the whole data and the data set, that's one of the things in finance that I always find interesting. It's, garbage in, garbage out. And I think AI is very much the same as finance or any other, technology or any other space. It's all about, do you have good records? Do you know what they mean? And can you translate them into real business speak? So,
Yep.
and it sounds like what you all are doing with AI really helps to kind of bridge that gap and do some of that translation.
Yep.
And especially if you're able to ask these questions, what does all of these intersections of data look like? It really streamlines the process and it frees up people's time, somebody like mine, to work more on financial strategy, to look at more, long term planning, all of those things. It just kind of helps put the pieces together much quicker.
Yep. Exactly.
I think that's great. And talking about how AI is working in that space, one other question that I have for you that I'd love to dive into, based on your introduction and what you shared earlier, I'd love to talk a little bit about successful exiting a company as well. I
Yeah.
know that's something that a lot of people hear a lot about, and I think that's their goal in business. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience on that.
Well, I was really lucky, and I was the first employee, so I wasn't a founder of this company, but sat desk to desk with the CEO for basically a decade, and it was a journey. It was like, I think of that roller coaster emoji a lot because it was up and down quite a bit, and you never know until it's actually done. So we always tried to grow the business, we tried to achieve our milestones, and it all came back to just how could we deliver the best possible product and set up the best possible partnerships so that we could be attractive to potential buyers. Do we have the right, marquee logo clients? Do we have the right revenue numbers? Do we have the right growth numbers? And I was just focused on the revenue side. My title was VP of Sales when we got acquired, and so I would just take the feedback from the founders on like, where do we need to be, and try to get as close to that number as we could possibly get to. And the acquisition process wasn't short. Um, it actually got delayed a little bit because we were set to close in, like, it felt like February or March of 2021, and then the whole
Ooh.
world shut down. And I remember the stock price of the company that was acquiring us was $9.52 at the time. And in March, it went down below a dollar. In 1 month, it went from $10 to $1. And I was like, oh my gosh, well, that like totally thought the deal was going to fall apart. We kept the communication going. And, over about a 6 month period, we put the deal back together. And again, it was 99% our founders doing all the work on making sure that everything came back together. And in August, we finally, closed. And when the whole team got acquired, we all got brought on to Constant Contact. And funny enough, I spent about 6 months at that company, and Constant Contact got purchased for $3 billion by Clear Lake Capital during that time. So I actually got two acquisitions within that one journey. And that was another interesting going from a public company to being acquired by PE. So, I think my takeaway is always just you kind of just got to have the business going and keeping the momentum and act like things are going as normal, because you never know. You never know until the deal is done and the money is in the bank, and you just got to keep going and running and growing and doing the best you can. Yeah, it was definitely some highs and lows in there.
I can understand that. One of the things as I think about that process, and you're talking about, this was not a quick process. I think you mentioned 10 years. So it's a long journey to go from, hey, I started a company to, hey, I'm, hitting my revenue targets and I'm starting to get some real good publicity and press to an acquisition.
Yep.
And I think it's a lot that goes into that. I'd love to dive in a little bit about, hitting some of those revenue targets
Yeah.
and what that kind of meant for you in that time.
Well, I think I think the public ones. So we were publicly on the Inc. 5,000 in 2018. We were just under 5 million in ARR, annual recurring revenue, and then
Hmm.
2019 we were on the Inc. 5,000 again at 10 million ARR, which in my opinion, like that's the promised land for SaaS, because you can get a 10x multiple on that. And hitting the 10 million annual recurring revenue was a huge milestone. And like those are public numbers out there. I had to double the business 4 years in a row. I think we went from the low 1 million ARR to 2.4, then to 5, then to 10. And each time, you're trying to improve ACV, so you're growing your existing clients, you're trying to expand revenue, net revenue retention needs to be higher. You need to make sure churn is really low. And that means you're spending a lot of time on servicing your existing customers. The team's got to grow. I mean, it is all hands on deck, and you're just omnipresent, especially at that size. When we got acquired, I think we were about a 60-person company. And so it was just, most of that was data science and engineering. And then we had a small team that did customer service and support and made sure that our existing client base was, happy. And then my sales team was about 12 people. So, it was all hands on deck all the time, trying to get everything going and running all the time to make sure we're hitting those numbers. It was definitely a hamster wheel.
I have no doubt on that, especially to get to, that 5 million or $10 million, that annual recurring revenue number as a SaaS company or any other company. That's a huge milestone.
Yeah, it's a huge milestone. And, we spent a good amount of time. I feel like there was a long period where we were just stuck at 40K MRR, just hovering around up there because we were in the product market fit phase, trying to figure out what's scalable, what's repeatable, how do we put the right process in place, how do we onboard, how do we deliver the same value to the same types of clients, what's our ICP. All that stuff took just time to really get it to click. And then once it clicked, we could start, pretty consistently adding, 20 deals per AE per year, and just keep, rinse and repeat that process.
That's a great point, and talking a little bit about that hamster wheel and putting all those things in place. I've found, and especially in working with clients that I work with, a lot of it is just kind of testing out what fits with the clients you're really going after and really knowing who your target market is.
Yep.
dialing in on who your client is, how are you going to serve them, and what do they really need?
Yep.
Because I know in the finance space, what most of my clients need is not what I, as a finance professional, really want to give them. It's more about like, how do I streamline them to the data? How do I get them to better decisions? How do I do those things? A lot of those general finance items is not really what they're looking for. And that's a-okay. It's how do I make that shift so that we cover all of those pieces? And it sounds like you were doing a lot of the same there and really trying to dial things in
Yeah.
to really give the best deliverable you could.
Exactly. And I think to your point, it's like, okay, we get one. The only point of us getting one customer was so that they go tell 10 of their friends how great we were, and then we could get 10 more customers. And so, okay, I would ask everyone, okay, who else do you know that would find value in us? Who else do you know that needs what we're doing? And that always would help, at least get one or two warm intros. And if those didn't close, maybe something else might. So, it's definitely trying to find that repeatable, scalable process, and just building up the top of the funnel and making sure you're getting enough at bats and making sure you're not having trouble closing them.
That's great. And I love what you're saying there about getting enough at bats, but talk to me a little bit about the importance on closing them as well. I know the warm intros are great and kind of getting the funnel filled up is wonderful, but how did you all work on making sure that those warm intros went to your ARR number?
Yeah, I think, you can manage to the number, right? Everyone kind of knows that there's a number in SaaS, and depending on the business, maybe it's between 20 and 25% close rate seems to be acceptable. And I'm sure some companies have, higher numbers. But I think it's figuring out, are we on track with the number? Great, let them run. And then from there, we can actually figure out, hey, how what's the process like? Okay, what are the key signals for closing a deal? And I think, to your point on the relationship, I knew that if my team got uh, on text messaging with a key decision maker at the prospect's company, 80% chance we were going to close the deal. And so that actually became a flag in our Salesforce where it was like, did you get the mobile phone number? Have you texted this person yet? Because if it was like, we almost knew for a fact that that company was going to come on board because we were texting with the CMO of pick your company. So that was one key and a really big indicator. The other big one was making sure that we were listening more often. And so, we found that on calls where if we talked less than 50% of the time, meaning we didn't just show up and throw up our product, we knew that, okay, that those deals that we talked 50% of the time had a much higher percentage of moving to the next stage in the funnel. And so the ones that we talked too much, 60, 70% of the time, those would almost never make it to the next qualification stage because the person wasn't interested. We weren't finding the need. We weren't asking enough questions. We weren't learning enough. And so those were two things that really stood out in the process. It was like, build the relationship to a point where they're comfortable giving you their phone number, and talk less, ask better questions.
That is some true gold nuggets right there. So, just to reiterate for the folks listening, so two things that were really making a difference there that I heard in the sales side of things is around getting somebody of authority's number and giving them a text just to kind of connect and see how things are going so that you develop that personal relationship better. And the other one is about listening. So it's incredible that whenever you go to sell something, that the key thing that you're doing is really trying to listen to the other person and figure out how to solve their problem, not just peddle your product. I love
Exactly. Right.
it. Yeah. So it sounds like you got some really great experience there. So how has that kind of helped you move into owning your company now, and how does it kind of shaped how you do things?
I think I always joke. It was like, going to a startup that had an exit and had that kind of growth was, better than an MBA. It was hands-on experience. I got to see everything, go through everything, all the failures along the way, how to bounce back. What do you do when customers don't pay you? What do you do when a marquee logo churns? What do you do? Like all these things that come up, you get the playbooks. And I didn't want to waste that. And so, of course, taking that experience and that knowledge has been super valuable in building these companies, because now when things come at me at 100 miles an hour, likely I've seen them once before, and so we can navigate it hopefully better than the last time, and
That's the goal, right?
and usually improve. And so, and I don't take it as a personally, like, I just understand not 100% of clients are going to pay their bills on times. Okay, that's like the reality of doing business. Now, how do we build a model and not get like emotionally down because that happens? So yeah, it's really helped building. You learn the key thing, which building a company is all about the people, and so it's all about how good of a team can we build, how good of talent can we attract, how good of talent can we retain, because you can get someone in the door, but then it's also great to work with them for 5, 6, 7 years. Um, and so I think getting the right people on the bus and then making sure that they're in the right seats is really like the thing that I think about the most day to day, because I know that if I have really capable, smart people around me, that when I need to delegate something off or have something handled, they're going to likely do a better job than what I'm capable of. And they're going to go and own that thing. And then it's going to become an amazing thing that they can own. So like, I just focus all my time now on people, 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 because I think it's how you build a great company.
That's a great perspective. And I couldn't agree more. I do think it's a lot about people. I think it's, not only giving them the freedom to execute and live in their area of expertise and greatness, but it also gives you as the founder and the CEO more mental bandwidth. So you're not always trying to do the delivery. Now you can think about those processes and how do you improve that process so that you can service one more client or, do a better delivery or a better
Yep.
onboarding, which is really important.
Yep. Yep. 100%. And I think we were talking a little bit about, how can AI be great, for businesses early on, but a lot of it is speed. I came across a company the other day that had like a 75% close rate, and all they do is they just have one person, and her only job is to just answer the phone and get back to customers within 5 minutes, and then coming inbound. And I think, that's a really interesting component where, oh, maybe AI could take over a job like that. Greet a customer, welcome them in, help onboard them to the first stage, help, get them the right resources, help set that first meeting, and do it right away when it's same session, it's top of mind, you have their attention. I mean, that's like, it's, kind of 101, but it's really actually hard to do the basics. Um,
Yeah.
and so,
Yeah.
I think that, any time a business can be, omnipresent with their customer and available when their customer is interested in their product, it helps move the needle so much more than you realize.
That's a great point. That speed to value is something that is hard to deliver on, especially if you're trying to service multiple clients at once and you're in a smaller business and you're doing some bootstrapping, or you don't necessarily, I don't know many companies who have the staff that they want all the time,
Yep.
trying to build to that level. So I do think that that's a great point, and AI is a great way to lean in on some of that.
Yep. We had a company just this week reach out to us. We got to them like within seconds, honestly, because it just happened to pop up. Answered it, set up the meeting, had the first call. He ended up buying, and we were like, "What? What was interesting about us?" And he said, "You guys were just the first that responded. I've pinned 3 other companies." And so it was
Ah,
like speed to value is like really can trump a lot of other process and a lot of other, maybe, things you might be lacking in product quality or whatever. If you're quick to the customer and you can help support them, it can really help.
for sure. I know, the old saying that my parents and grandparents used to say about the early bird getting the worm. I think it's still true.
Yep.
Maybe not necessarily first thing in the morning, but being first on getting back to your clients or whatever you're doing there, and really getting to the delivering the value, because it's hard today to differentiate yourself.
Yep.
And customer service is a great way to do that, along with your product.
Yep. 100%.
Well, James, this has been a great conversation. I love it. I definitely appreciate your perspective. Love learning about AI and all the other nuggets that you dropped around, people first, how to really improve your sales pipeline and other things. So if folks want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
My email is james@Katara AI. Most of my social stuff is at James Hotson. So I'm on Twitter. However, email and Twitter seem to be the easy ones.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to have you on.
Of course. Thanks, Heather. Appreciate it.